Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist oppression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. It is your local community radio station that you are tuned into. My name is Andy and I will be with you for the next hour, broadcasting on Yaga and Turrbal country. And today on the show, it is an interesting one, the timing, because of course tomorrow there is a federal election happening, which is a big deal in most of the media, and I do urge you to think carefully about how you want to vote and then to do that. But here on The Paradigm Shift, I have not been covering the election, interviewing political hopefuls or anything like that, because basically I just think that the real changes that are really going to make our lives better are going to be done by us getting together with other ordinary people like us, finding what power we have and trying to use it to make our own lives better, rather than hoping that a few individuals caught up in the immense bureaucratic machinery of the state apparatus, that they're going to make the positive changes for us. I think that we're going to have to do a lot of things ourselves, and some people say that makes me an anarchist, and it's a label I don't mind. And this weekend, a whole bunch of us anarchists are going to be getting together the day after the big celebration of parliamentary democracy. There will be a smaller celebration of anarchist democracy, which is the Kurilpa Anarchist Bookfair. It's happening on Sunday at Jagera Hall in Musgrave Park there in South Brisbane. It starts at 9:30am and it goes all the way through to 5pm. There's going to be a bunch of different talks and there's going to be a bunch of different stalls there sharing anarchist literature of all types and persuasions, and you'll hear from some of the people involved over the course of the show today. I spoke to Tom Morrison, who's part of the organising collective of the book fair. I also spoke to Elina Sleiman, who is going to be giving a talk about a women's anarchist history of Brisbane. And also I spoke to Oliver Graham, who is from the Anarchist Communist Federation, a newly formed collective of groups from around the country who share similar politics. They were previously in a city called Anarchist Communist Mianjin. And so I spoke to him about their group, but also about, I guess, unions and anarchism and how the two relate, because, of course, it's also a big week for the union movement. The 1st of May, commemorating the struggle for the 8-hour day, and it is worth remembering that our ancestors put a lot on the line to ensure that we would have a life that is not all slaving away for the capitalist system, but instead that we have a life with an equal mixture of rest, play and work. And some of them lost their lives for it, and the May Day is really also a memorial for the Haymarket martyrs who were killed for struggling for the 8-hour day back in Chicago in 1880 something. I think that's really important. It's important to remember that kind of history and be grateful for it, and to remember it for our own thinking about what it looks like going forward, what kind of world we live in. And I think part of the thing I think we should be organising for a bit less paid work in 2025. I think we could go a bit shorter than a 5-day, 8-hour work week, and maybe we take a bit of inspiration from those 8-hour day workers and organisers back then. So anyway, I spoke to Ollie about unions and anarchism, and so that is all coming up on the show today. Let's start off with an interview that I did with Tom Morrison talking about the Kurilpa Anarchist Bookfair.
Yeah, g'day, my name's Tom. I'm one of the organisers at the Kurilpa Anarchist Bookfair. Very much looking forward to seeing everyone there on Sunday for what promises to be a pretty exciting day.
Yes, and we are going to be talking about this book fair, but let's start with the word anarchist, which can mean a lot of different things to different people. So for you, putting this book fair together, what does anarchism mean to you?
Anarchism to me is basically the idea that we are the best people, we are the most qualified people to be controlling our own lives, to be running the day-to-day affairs of our lives, working together to improve our communities and have democratic control over our workplaces. It basically means the community being in the seat of all decisions and being basically in the driving seat of our lives.
So the inaugural Kurilpa Anarchist Book Fair is happening this Sunday. Can you tell us what inspired you to organise this book fair?
Well, it wasn't really at my own initiative. That started out with the Blackcurrant Anarchist Distro, which will be there on the day. Since then, it's just been basically getting together friends and comrades from various different groups and individuals who have been really sort of excited to have an opportunity to showcase our ideas. It's been quite a long time since we've had any real sort of large-scale convergence of anarchists in Brisbane, Mianjin. I think the last time would have been the 2013 Brisbane Anarchist Summer School, which you were also a part of. But since then, yeah, we've only really sort of, despite the fact that Brisbane's always had a very strong anarchist movement, and we've in fact got multiple organisations operating out of this city, we never really sort of take the opportunity to showcase our ideas publicly in sort of a public forum, apart from sort of, you know, the occasional sort of introductory night or a film screening here and there. So we were sort of thinking along the lines that it might be a sort of good idea to start trying to find a forum to actually sort of boost that outreach and sort of, you know, demonstrate sort of to the public that this is sort of a living movement that sort of, you know, is quite accessible and quite open to meeting with people to discuss our ideas.
What's the significance of doing a literature expo?
Well, I suppose anarchism has always expressed itself through literature. You know, since the earliest days of anarchism, you know, we've always expressed ourselves with newspapers on the streets and pamphlets, and that tradition has gone on ever since. So anarchism has sort of always tied itself very closely to literature, and you know, it's really an expression of the creativity of our movement. You know, that everyone in it is sort of really encouraged to pick up the pen and express themselves on paper, or as it may be these days on the airwaves or digitally. So yeah, it's just a great way to introduce people to our ideas. You know, give them something that they can take home and read on the train or on their lunch breaks and have some good, you know, have some thought about.
I assume it'll be a bit of an anarchist approach to the notion of books as well, that it won't be all bound volumes, but all kinds of written material.
That's very true. Yeah, there are going to be some volumes. There will be a few people there selling big, thick books, but there'll also be zines, you know, just printed sort of photocopy sheets of paper that with cut and paste on them. There's going to be all sorts of different things there on the day. Not just books even.
And now, it's an interesting date. Obviously, it was picked before the election was announced, but it makes for a funny juxtaposition having the election one day and the Anarchist Book Fair the next. What do you think of this?
Yeah, well, the original reason we picked the date was pretty much because it falls on the Labor Day weekend. You know, the anarchist movement has always felt very close to Labor Day. You know, a lot of us would even go so far as saying that the origins of May Day sort of fall from the anarchist tradition with the assassination of the Chicago martyrs back in the 19th century, and that triggered a wave of protests across the planet in their defence. They were a group of anarchists, and essentially the anarchist movement has always sort of felt a certain sense of pride and ownership over May Day, and so we felt it would be appropriate to put our event on to coincide with that. And as it happens now, we're going to be bookended by the election on one hand and the Labor Day March on the other, the latter of which we're a bit more excited about. But yeah, it does prove to be a pretty high voltage political weekend. There's going to be some pretty charged feelings, I think.
It is an interesting thing, I guess. A lot of people would say anarchism is about smashing the state and that anarchists shouldn't vote, or that, I guess, state power is the main kind of nexus of where anarchism is targeting its critique and its protest. But it's a bit more nuanced than that, isn't it? I guess, what are your thoughts on how this fits together?
Anarchism is a broad movement, of course, so, there's a lot of diverging opinions about sort of involvement in elections themselves. Some people believe that it's fair to strategically vote, keep people like Dutton out of power. Others completely reject the idea of participating whatsoever. But we're all united by this idea that basically real political power doesn't rest with the state, that the state is an oppressive apparatus, really, that sort of exists pretty much for its own sake or for the defence of capitalist rights. We don't actually believe that you can actually have a democracy while workers are excluded from democracy in the workplace. We believe that real democracy lies in the power to actually control your own life and your own value. Fundamentally, the only thing that we really do have is our own bodies, and if we don't actually have the right to control how we use those bodies, such as in the workplace, we can't really call that a democracy. So fundamentally, we don't really sort of recognise this sort of idea of giving some abstract representatives the right to make decisions on our behalf as a real form of democracy. We see it more as a sort of dictatorship of the capitalist class more than anything.
All right. Well, Tom, if people come along on Sunday, what can they expect?
Well, we've got a broad range of organisations participating from all sorts of different ideological persuasions. We've got sort of groups that are more of the trade union persuasion, like the Industrial Workers of the World and the Anarchist Federation. We've got more insurrectionist groups like Class War Federation. We've got booksellers like Jura Books and Blackcurrant. We've got anarchist groups like Anarchist Communist Federation, which have just become the Brisbane branch of the Anarchist Communist Federation. So we've also got the Burmese community coming along, helping out with raising awareness about the armed struggle in Myanmar and the earthquake that's recently happening there. And they're going to be selling some Burmese cuisine on the day. We've also got a range of speeches and talks by the Anarchist Communist Federation and the Anarcho-Syndicalist Network. We've also got Elina talking about a women's history of anarchism in Brisbane. We've got Chris from the Philippines who will be joining us talking about anti-capitalism in that country. And of course, most excitingly in my view, we've got a very special guest joining us, Jokpal Freeman, who will be talking about his experiences organising in prisons in Bulgaria and anti-fascism, which is quite exciting to have him. Yeah, so it's going to be quite an exciting day, I think, and we're expecting to see sort of all sorts of people from all sorts of different places joining us. I know for a fact we've got people joining us from Sydney and Lismore, so it's going to be a really diverse range of people, and it's really exciting.
All right, thanks very much, Tom, and I'll see you there on Sunday.
Yeah, see you then. Thank you very much for having me.
Tom Morrison, who is one of the organisers of the Kurilpa Anarchist Bookfair. You just heard a bit of what it's about. And one of the groups that will have a stall there is the Anarchist Communist Federation. And I spoke to Oliver Graham from that group about what they do. And also we'll talk a bit about unions being that time of the year. Let's have a listen to Oliver.
My name is Oliver Graham. I'm a member of the Anarchist Communist Federation, and I'm a CFMEU delegate. I'm a cabinet maker by trade. Yeah, that's pretty much me.
Yes, shortly we will get to talking about unions and anarchism, but I guess to start off with, you just mentioned you are part of the Anarchist Communist Federation, who until recently were Anarchist Communist Mianjin. Do you want to give us a bit of an intro to what your organisation does, and I guess about the federation that's just happened?
So with our organisation, so Anarchist Communist Mianjin was a group, and this has just been announced on the 1st of May. Basically, we formed with similar groups in Geelong and Melbourne to form the Anarchist Communist Federation. Basically, that's a place for anarchists of the same persuasion as to what should we be doing when we go out into the world. Like, how do we make anarchism exist as a sort of living, breathing force in people's lives, not just, some nice ideas on paper, but, something that's spurring people to action. And we can talk a little bit about that. So that's kind of what our organisation exists to do. It's just a bunch of people who are anarchists, believe in a certain set of politics, and agree to a certain set of strategy for implementing stuff in the real world.
Yeah, I guess that's a good thing to talk about, because there are many different strands of anarchism, and as you say, you've joined forces with a couple of groups with similar values. And so how would you say that your particular brand of anarchist communism differs from other types of anarchism?
I guess something that might raise a few eyebrows is the communist part. Basically, doesn't mean that we're pro-Stalin or whatever. We just believe in the principle that a future society should have an economic policy from each according to their ability. So whatever you can produce, if you can, that'd be lovely if you produce it, and to each according to their needs. So basically making sure that no one goes without. Yeah, and a lot of it is to do with that strategy. So we have an emphasis on working within trade unions, and we also have certain ideas about, I guess, working together as a collective and what that means. So we're perhaps a bit more in favour of formal organisations where you have meetings and vote on things than other people, other anarchists perhaps. Unfortunately, I'm the boring kind of anarchist. I'm not the cool throw over cop cars. I'm the 5 meetings in 1 week style of anarchist, unfortunately. So I think if in terms of aesthetics, that's the sort of way I would differentiate myself.
Hey, meetings can be cool too.
Oh, I'm a stickler for a good meeting. Love a good meeting.
Well, let's talk about federation, because you've just gone from one local organisation to a kind of umbrella of groups around the country. What's the importance of that?
Yeah, so I think the state, which we're against, so the Australian government, that's of course organised nationally. Capitalism is organised internationally. So while people can have great effects in their local communities doing organising, I think that eventually you have to come to the face with, you need to organise something on a national and international scale. So if you want to organise a transfer from a society that is, for profit to one that is based on the common good and direct democracy, and that it needs to be national and international in scope. So being able to coordinate with other groups on common projects, I think, is really important, and having that sort of level of understanding with each other. So knowing that you're on the same page and that you're working towards the same goals, I think is very important. And also it stops you from having a double up of work, because I think there was 3 anarchist communist newspapers running at once, which was perhaps inefficient.
So you're combining the publications as well?
Yeah, so we got a publication called Picket Line, which the first issue of that is out now, and you can get that at the Anarchist Bookfair stall.
Well, let's talk about unions. As I understand it, it's part of the Anarchist Communist Federation policy that all their members should be active within their unions. And it's interesting timing because this weekend, of course, is International Workers' Day, a big celebration of the union movement. So I wonder if you could tell us why you think unions are an important part of trying to organise for a more equal anarchist society.
I guess there's a few parts to that. I think you can look at it historically. So anarchism, when it sort of came into being as a political force and people starting to identify themselves more as anarchists in a large way, it was in an organisation called the First International, which was a sort of combination of left groups and trade unions across the world. And it was in this sort of milieu of workers and unions that anarchism started to develop itself as an ideology, and that people started to identify more as anarchists. Also, May Day has roots in the anarchist movement. I think it was the roots of May Day come from a strike that was in Chicago on May 1st that was organised. A lot of anarchists helped organise that, German migrant anarchists in Chicago. Famously, a bunch of anarchist labour organisers were sort of put up on Trump charges in relation to the strike, and a bunch of them were executed. So I think it was 7 or 8 anarchists were executed, and so that became a international commemoration for the struggle for the 8-hour day and for the labour movement more generally. So the roots of that is in anarchism. In terms of the here and now, I think that it's about engaging people where they're at. The vast majority of people are workers. They have to earn a wage to make a living. So engaging those people and trying to build up power for themselves, not for any individual union official or politician or whatever have you, but power at work, at the workplace. We sort of see this as the building block of a future society, because if you can empower someone at work to say, strike for better wages, stand up for safer conditions, and that they can run that struggle as a work group, as a collective, and make democratic decisions as to how that struggle is going to proceed, that's a great, I guess, teaching tool for what a future society would look like. And that eventually you would hope people joining their union becoming more active and more democratic as time goes on, that could look as a sort of semi-structure for what a future society could look like. And that we are building a sort of power for the working class, for the dispossessed, for the masses, whatever you want to call it, so that you can make a clean break with capitalism as a system and sort of put it to rest finally.
There is another side to the union movement, and I guess it's ironic that this weekend, the May Day weekend, which as you said has origins in this anarchist organising, but there's also a federal election, and in Australia the union movement is so tied to the Labor Party, and so much of the political energy and also the money, the workers' union dues in this country goes towards political organising for the Labor Party. I guess, do you want to talk about that, and I guess how a kind of anarchist unionism would differentiate from that?
Yeah, 100%. I think that this has been a long-standing issue within the labour movement, especially within the Australian labour movement, is ties to political parties. So I guess you can see two arguments basically throughout. There's the sort of reformist argument and there's the militant and revolutionary argument. And the reformist argument is essentially, well, you know, we don't have to go on strike. We can just get a political party together. We can get them into office because workers are the majority of the country, and then they can solve everything for us. Which sounds lovely in theory, but in practice, I think we're seeing some of the awful stuff that the Labor Party is doing, both to the labour movement, to the working class and abroad. So to the union movement, the forced administration of the CFMEU union basically ripped away any democratic controls that members had of that union and basically handed over to sort of government-picked administrators. For the working class, I think that they definitely have had a very weak response to, you know, the cost of living crisis, you know, the rental crisis and so many other things, groceries. And in terms of internationally, I think, you know, their response to the genocide in Gaza has been, you know, absolutely lacklustre, you know, continuing the sale of weapons to a country doing a genocide. So there's that one side, so that's that argument, okay, let's put workers into parliament. And the other side was the sort of more militant and revolutionary idea, which was, this sounds lovely on paper, but in practice, the workers' movement is going to be bought off by this political party. The political party has to run a government, and so it's going to go more and more further away from the working class. And so what we need to do is we need to organise independently of a political party, and we need to make a clean break with capitalism. We need to build something that the workers can like self-manage in a directly democratic way. And I think that side of the union movement, the side that was pro-social democratic parties, they've certainly won out in Australia. I think the result of that has been a union movement that has been really sluggish, has been very weak, has had not a great deal of democratic control over its structures. A handful of sort of union bureaucrats, paid officials, have an unprecedented sort of level of control over organisations that are meant to be democratically run by their members. And in terms of what an anarchist union would look like, the sort of thing that I'm looking for isn't necessarily an anarchist union in that it's not politically anarchist, like just to join it you don't have to be an anarchist, but it has structures that genuinely represent the workers. The union is democratically run by the membership, that it is militant, so it's willing to take strike action, it's willing to take illegal industrial action, it's active on union issues that go beyond the workplace. So some of the port blockades as part of Unionists for Palestine is a sort of example of that. Yeah, so I think it's... And the way that we get from the state that we're in to a democratic union movement is we need people to step up, we need people to get organised in their union, engage in their union and figure out the ways, okay, how does this union movement, and my union in particular, need to change so that the members have control?
Well, there's much more to be said on this, and I suppose the Anarchist Communist Federation does have more to say. If people come down to the book fair on Sunday, what can they expect to see at your stall?
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of pamphlets talking about our politics, things on unionism, things on First Nations liberation, feminism, Palestine liberation, things like that, of that nature. And of course the publication Picket Line. Also probably there will be a publication that isn't a publication of Anarchist Communist Federation, but I'm personally a part of it, called Hard Hat, which is made up of construction workers, within the various construction unions. It's basically just a monthly newsletter about union issues and things like that. So, and also there'll be some lovely people down there who are great to have a conversation with, and a bunch of different people who are organising at their workplaces across a bunch of different industries. So, you know, maybe you might not identify with me as a construction worker, but, you know, maybe you might identify with someone who's organising as a support worker, for instance. So, yeah. Be sure to come along and be sure to give us a holler.
All right, thanks very much, Ollie, for having a chat with us.
My pleasure. See you there.
On Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ, and we were speaking with Oliver Graham about the union movement and anarchism as well. Somebody else who will be there is Elina Sleiman, who will be giving a talk about a women's anarchist history of Brisbane, which will be an interesting topic to learn more about. And I did speak to Elina this morning about that, and so let's have a listen.
My name is Elina. I'm someone who's been researching radical history in Brisbane for the last 3 years.
Yes, as you say, you have been working hard recording the radical history of Brisbane. To start off with, I'm interested in why you think this is a worthwhile use of your time and an important thing to do.
Yes, that's a great question. I think history is so important. I think there's a common feeling maybe amongst general society that history is a bit irrelevant to us, but I don't see it that way at all. I don't really see that there's much distinction between the past and the present. I think our present is just an accumulation of what's gone on before us. And especially in our context, I think we live in a time where the world around us is really mystified, and we're subject to so many myths about our own reality. And for me, being able to understand that reality has meant looking to the past. I think also, especially in our context here in Australia, in a settler colonial context, which has always been very actively against history and against knowing what's gone on here. I often feel a massive silence about the past, and it's been really useful to me to be able to uncover that and get more of a better sense of where I am.
It's interesting, your own practice is a very localised history making. You've really focused on Brisbane people, although not entirely. What's the importance for you of that, of doing it in your local area?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said about trying to understand where I am, and also just to get a real feeling of like a living history, you know, that history that's not just written down in a book, but when I'm walking around and going around in different places, I can understand what's actually happened there and how this history is played out in physical space, which I think is just really useful for us to fight back against that feeling of history being really irrelevant. Also, I think particularly in Brisbane's case, there is this strong feeling that sort of nothing ever happened here, and that Brisbane is a really sort of boring and not very a place of like historical importance at all. And I think it's been really interesting uncovering the untruth of that, and that there's been so many sort of dramatic and interesting things that have gone on here and that are still living around us if we put some effort into uncovering them.
Well, on Sunday you are going to be doing a talk, and it is titled A Women's Anarchist History of Brisbane. What are some of the things that you have uncovered in preparing for this talk?
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking, like the title says, about anarchist history, particularly from the period of the sort of late 60s, early 70s on through the 80s. That is particularly because that period sees the birth of like organised anarchist politics in Brisbane. So not just people sort of prescribing to anarchist politics, but people organising collectively to pursue those politics. that was really interesting to discover for me. But also particularly something that came across very strongly in my research was the relationship between feminism and anarchism during that times, and the way that women often fought for these politics within anarchist organization themselves, fought for women's voices and their concerns to be heard. And really, I mean, the root of these politics is the pursuit of collective autonomy and, you know, the belief that people have the capacity to manage their own lives. And when it really came down to it, what has come across is that that struggle was often fought for by women, and in rejection of the sort of domination and dismissal of even men with radical or anarchist politics.
Yeah, it is so important to find, like, I guess not just the history in a lot of ways isn't very well known, but that history always has multiple viewpoints, and that in this case, women's viewpoints of this history is maybe different to a men's viewpoint. Yeah,
definitely. That's something that came across, and not just within anarchist movements, but the broader, like, radical movements in Brisbane generally. I found it interesting, that connection between women struggling to be heard in the past, and then the way that agency to speak and to have your voice heard carries on through time, through, like, who gets remembered, you know, who's writing these articles and books about the past, and who's you know, remembered for their actions in the past, and who is forgotten, which often is, like, more marginalized people.
It is quite a fascinating period of history, that time we're talking about, from the 60s on, because, of course, in a like a meta-history sense, Joh Bjelke-Petersen was Premier of Queensland. It's famously this kind of conservative place. But in terms of anarchism in Brisbane, there was a lot of really interesting stuff happening. And I've actually heard people tell me, old-timers, that they moved to Brisbane specifically because the anarchist scene was so thriving there. People were moving from Melbourne to Brisbane to be part of the anarchist scene. That's an interesting, I guess, duality, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and that definitely is something that people say. I mean, I've heard people say that, you know, Melbourne was Maoist, Sydney was Leninist, and Brisbane was anarchist, which is such a duality when people, like, often only remember the sort of conservatism and the authoritarianism of the Joh years. But I guess it makes sense that in reaction to that, you'd have people looking towards a lot more liberatory solutions.
So some of the things in that history, briefly, I guess, I could guess that you'd be talking about things like self-management group and FOCO and maybe like street marches and things like that. What type of things are you going to cover?
Yeah, I'll definitely be talking about the self-management group. That's going to be a big topic, especially because what I said is focusing on the birth of organised anarchist politics, which is essentially the SMG, or the self-management group, who interestingly aren't using the exact word anarchism, but who were pursuing politics of that people should have, people do have the capacity to manage their own affairs, and that their slogan was society for a society based on workers' councils. So we'll be talking a bit about that, but then also the sort of aftermath following the breakup of that group, particularly in West End, where a lot of anarchists accumulated, and the sort of places and sites that anarchists established in West End, places like the Learning Exchange, Kropotkin's Anarchist Cafe, and other things that were going on around West End at that time.
All right, well, do you want to give a final plug for your talk? What time is it on Sunday?
My talk is the first of the day at the Kurilpa Anarchist Bookfair. My talk's at 10:30 to 11:30 at 121 Cordelia Street. That is the Yagara Art Centre in South Brisbane, next to Musgrave Park.
All right, thanks, Elina, for chatting with us, and I will see you on Sunday.
See you on Sunday.
You are listening to 4ZZZ, your local community radio station. I was just talking to Elina who will be giving a talk on a women's history of anarchist Brisbane. There is, of course, loads of great events happening all the time in Brisbane, and loads of people in their everyday lives trying to organise a better world, not just gathering once every few years to vote for the politician that least disgusts them. You know, what we're told is our democratic contribution. Well, it can be so much more, and for a lot of people it is. They're out there every day making this world a better place. We'll be back next week hearing from more of those people. I'll see you next week.